Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, the newspapers are yet again full of rumours of sexual harassment taking place in Parliament, and now the Prime Minister has got involved. Theresa May has written to Commons Speaker John Bercow, calling for new procedures to support parliamentary staff, saying that the current regime lacks teeth. In the letter, the Prime Minister said that she wants to see contractually binding grievance procedures and an independent mediation service. The former chairman of the Committee on Standards in Public Life, Sir Alistair Graham, welcomed some of the proposals, but warned against overcomplicating procedures, adding that he was less sure about mediation. It comes as the political website Guido Fawkes and The Times both claim to have seen a spreadsheet of redacted names said to be circulated by junior aides that accuses a number of Tory politicians of unacceptable behaviour. Separately, there have been rumours about a small number of Labour MPs. The Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn, said he was ready to back the Prime Minister and establish robust and effective new rules. Over the weekend, a Cabinet Office investigation was ordered into whether Conservative MP and International Trade Minister Mark Garnier breached ministerial rules after alleged inappropriate behaviour towards his former secretary. Well, it's just been announced that Andrea Leadsom, the leader of the House of Commons, will make a statement later this afternoon. And we can get the latest from our political correspondent, Vicky Young. Vicky, I understand that you've just come back from the briefing, Number 10 spokesman, to lobby journalists, political journalists like yourself. What was said?
Well, his point was that the Prime Minister takes this very seriously, and he said that the Prime Minister would be sitting beside Andrea Leadsom when she does make that statement later today. But there are some who are accusing the Prime Minister of being too reactive rather than proactive. She has, as you say, ordered this Cabinet Office inquiry into Mark Garnier. Some are saying, can't she decide for herself whether she thinks that that was inappropriate behaviour or not? Should she take action? Should she fire him from his job? Now, the Prime Minister's official spokesman said that he wasn't going to get into every discussion that there's ever been between the party whips, they're the people in charge of discipline, and of course the rumour is always that they have a little black book with the misdemeanours of MPs which they can use against them to try and get them to follow the party line. The spokesman said that he wouldn't get into those conversations, but he did deny one of the suggestions in the newspapers at the weekend that there was a dossier containing this information which the Prime Minister had seen. He said there was no dossier, therefore the Prime Minister can't have seen it. He did say she was deeply concerned about recent reports and any unwanted sexual behaviour in any workplace is unacceptable, and the Prime Minister wants to make sure that the reputation of Parliament isn't damaged, but made the point that this has to be done on a cross-party basis.
Now, is there a feeling that there have been some parts of the media that have overreacted, that there hasn't been a big enough distinction between what are genuine and very serious claims of alleged sexual harassment or serious sexual assault or even rape allegations, and what is called a culture of sort of sexist behaviour within Parliament?
Yes, and I think that that is always the issue in these cases. This has happened before where MPs have got into trouble. Some have ended up in court and been found not guilty of certain accusations. But there is always the issue of the strange relationship, if you like, that there is anyway between an office which has the MP at the head of the office. They are the line manager, they are the employer of a researcher, potentially of younger members of the community, and the idea that power is put into all of this and that they can be taken advantage of. So if you are a researcher, something has happened to you, who do you go to with that complaint? And I think it's still that which we've been talking about for very many years when it comes to Westminster. That has not been resolved. And I think that is where now the Prime Minister's writing to the Speaker of the House of Commons to work out if there's a way of this being done, of maybe having a third party, or should it be left up to the parties themselves to deal with it? The problem there, of course, is that politics comes into play. It may not be in the best interest of the party leader to have a scandal of that nature. So I think this is still, after all these years of this kind of talk, it's still what they're wrestling with. How do you deal with it? How can people speak out about it? And really, as we've seen with other cases in Hollywood and all the rest of it, Once people feel they can speak out about it, then you might get to the truth.
Vicky Young, thank you very much. Lucy Powell, have you experienced sexual harassment in Westminster or in politics?
Not as an MP, no. I think the power inequality is what is always at the root cause of abuse, harassment, or sexual violence, and that's all on a spectrum there. So I think as an MP, I feel like I'm more in a position of power, and that's harder for people to exploit me in that way. But as a younger researcher myself and working in politics, through my 20s, I was certainly subject to bullying and inappropriate behaviour, which I felt I had nowhere to go with at that time. In fact, I knew it wouldn't be in my interest to try and go anywhere with it, because you don't want to sort of have that kind of mark on your career. And I think that is the issue here, and it's something that a culture that I think exists across many of the top professions, probably in the BBC, media, politics and elsewhere. But we are lawmakers, so we have to set an example, and we have to go further than other institutions in making sure that that kind of behaviour is eradicated.
Right,
we'll
but
have somewhere to go.
Right, but how big is the problem then, do you think? I mean, is the storm around these claims of sexual harassment reflecting what is going on in the corridors of power? Is it rampant?
Well, I don't know is the answer, and I think the truth is that to not know is sort of part of the problem. I mean, certainly we saw the scandal within the Liberal Democrat Party with women coming forward. That was only a year or so ago. Women who were trying to become MPs, get on in the Liberal Democrat Party, all came out. So there have been scandals. Certainly, if I hear of anything myself directly, that any direct allegations, I would act on them. I would take those forward, and I don't. But I think the power inequalities, the way in which our offices are set up and Parliament and so forth. And I do know within the Labour Party there is a bigger issue at the moment as well, which is connected, which is about the systematic bullying and abuse of women at all levels of the Labour Party. And I think we're probably not alone in that.
Right, and have you actually gone to the party itself to complain about this? Has it been dealt with?
Well, we raise that regularly. I've raised specific incidents that I've been subject to. We raise it in the Women's P, in the Parliamentary Labour Party and others. And I would like to see the Labour Party taking a much more serious stance on that as well, because it was only a month ago that a female leading political correspondent required a bodyguard coming to our conference, and I don't think enough was said about that at the time. And we need to show strong leadership, even when it means taking on our own side.
John Whittingdale, one of your colleagues, has said that yes, something needs to be done, but actually we're talking about a minority of incidents. Is he right?
Well, firstly, I think I agree with almost everything Lucy said. So I think there's hopefully a good cross-party consensus that there is a problem here, and we do need to tackle it and figure out the best way to do it, for both our parties and the other parties as well. In terms of how big a problem is it, I can't honestly tell you. I've only been in Parliament for 2 years. My understanding from colleagues who have been there for a lot longer is the situation is a lot better now than it was in the past. But as I read these stories, like everybody else, and hear what Lucy has to say as well, clearly there is still a problem that we need to fix, and making sure that people feel comfortable that they can bring allegations to light is going to be part of the process of knowing how big the problem is.
Well, then let's take Mark Garnier, the International Trade Minister, who told his secretary to buy sex toys for him and used a demeaning phrase when addressing her. He says that actually this was taken out of context and it's not sexual harassment. Is it acceptable language and behaviour in your mind?
It's not language that I would use personally, but I don't think we want to get into the business of kind of trial by television about a situation that we don't have specific first-hand knowledge of. I think it's absolutely right that that's being investigated as... Should
he be suspended while that investigation is going on?
I think that's a decision of the Prime Minister, but I think until the facts are established, and he's very much disputed the facts and the interpretation of them from the get-go, so I think it's right that an independent investigation happens, and once the facts are known, obviously the Prime Minister can make a decision on that.
Right, if you say the language isn't language that you would use, presumably you wouldn't use it because you don't think it is acceptable. Is it enough just to have an investigation into whether he has breached the ministerial code?
Well, my understanding of the ministerial code, obviously not being a minister, I don't have incorrect detail of it, is that it's pretty broad and is able to look at a range of behaviour. And I think that's what the Prime Minister will have wanted. I think she's trying to lead from the front on this issue and make sure that we get to the bottom of not just that case, but any other cases that might be out there.
The Times is reporting, Lucy Powell, that at least 4 Labour MPs have been accused of harassing young women, including 2 who have served in Jeremy Corbyn's shadow cabinet. And this morning, I've just heard the Shadow Minister, Kat Smith, telling the BBC she reported a Labour Labour colleague who tried to kiss her when she was a campaigner. I mean, this does cut across all parties, doesn't it?
Absolutely, and I don't think there's any sort of moral high ground here that anybody can particularly assert. You know, everybody's got to hold a mirror to themselves. I would say, though, that swift action is necessary by suspending people. I was one of the first people to call for Jared O'Mara to be suspended last week because I felt the allegations were so serious that should happen. And I think the Prime Minister should be doing the same with her own ministers now. It's not an issue for the Cabinet Office. It's whether she personally is comfortable having somebody who's admitted that behaviour taking place. But I'm not here to make a party political point about it, certainly not. But we have to try and make these things above politics, because if it's not convenient for political leaders, or they're in a weak position, or it's one of their allies, or it's one of their friends, they're not going to be as strong about it as they should be.
Right. And Miriam Gonzalez, who's married to the former Liberal Democrat MP Nick Clegg, said that Labour must have known about Jared O'Mara's homophobic and misogynistic comments because she and Nick Clegg knew about them. Is it credible to say, for Labour to say, that they didn't know about his past?
Well, they should have known about his past. There's obviously been a failure in the vetting process if they didn't. And I used to be a chief of staff for Ed Miliband, and we went through many disciplinary issues, whether it was about MPs or whether it's about trying to select candidates for by-elections. And in our era, Jared would not have got through that vetting process, and I don't know what happened in this case that he did. But that's why I think it was right that he was suspended. And we've got to take a very strong stance, and it can't be just because somebody is your political ally that you are softer on that, or that it's a minister and you don't want the kind of fuss. You've got to take a strong stance. And
right.
Culture change requires strong leadership, and that applies to Jeremy Corbyn, Theresa May and everybody else.
But changing culture is very nebulous, isn't it? It's a difficult thing to do without specific allegations. When you look at what the whips do, the party managers, I mean, it is commonly known that they have reports on many MPs, that they have information that is stored about MPs that they can use against them, rightly or wrongly, in the event of tight votes. Difficult, particularly now in a minority government. Are you aware of that sort of information that is held by party managers? No,
I am absolutely not aware of that. And obviously that is the law of the Whip's office, and that there's this black book sitting in a safe somewhere with all these things in it. I mean, it's obviously not something that I've come across. But I think it's important to distinguish between, look, of course there's gossip about who might be dating who and that kind of thing. But what we're talking about here is more important than that. And I'm very confident that if people are aware of serious allegations of sexual harassment, those will and should be brought to light.
But how will they be brought to light?
That's what the Prime Minister has actually written to the Speaker about, and hopefully on a cross-party basis. We're in this odd situation as MPs, which people often don't realise, that we employ our 3, 4, 5 members of staff ourselves, lots of small little businesses. What we need clearly is a more formal institutional process.
What would you like?
Well, like a big company. Any big company would have an independent HR department. So if someone feels threatened or abused, there is someone they can go to and talk to who is not their direct report, who obviously, as Lucy said, there's a power imbalance there and they worry about their career and what might happen to them. They need to be able to go to someone else, a third party, to raise their complaint, and then there should be a formal process to see that complaint through. Right,
so it isn't enough just to call for a mediation service. No. You would like a much more robust system set up. So in a way, is Theresa May acting with enough sort of seriousness to this problem?
Well, I think she's shown very serious purpose here. I mean, she's written straight away. We're going to have a statement today, I think, from the Leader of the House with the Prime Minister sitting next to her, and it's important that we work together. I think she's right to say that we should try and tackle this problem across Parliament. So we need to come up jointly, all of us around the table, with a solution that we think is robust and is going to make sure that Parliament is what we want it to be, which is a safe and welcoming place for all people, especially young people, to start their careers and come to work.
But should she have taken more direct action herself about Mark Garnier and Stephen Crabb, against whom they've also been allegations made?
Mark Garnier is now facing a very formal and serious investigation, so I think that is a serious step, and she's now instituting a process which hasn't been done before, working with other political leaders to put in place exactly the process that you're talking about. So I think, obviously it's the early stages of a journey that we need to go on, and I agree with Lucy, it's all about cultural change at the end of the day. We all have a responsibility to contribute to changing the culture in Parliament so that it is this.
So it cannot be left just to the parties?
No, but where I would agree with Rishi is that I think we need a third-party independent place that people can go to. They should be able to do that with anonymity as well, to raise concerns that might be smaller or lower level and decide whether they want to take them forward. The word I do object to that Theresa May has used in her proposals today, though, is mediation. I don't think this is a question of mediation. It's not we have a dispute with our boss and that needs some kind of mediation. This is about sending clear signals about inappropriate behaviour, behaviour that may become much more serious in terms of where it extends to. And so mediation is the wrong word for that. But third party, independent, anonymous, they are some of the elements I think that can help take this forward.
Well, let's get more now on the allegations of sexual harassment around Parliament and Holyrood. The Labour MP, Rupa Hook, has told Sky News that she was sexually harassed in her 20s by an MEP at the European Parliament. And pressure is building on Theresa May to toughen up disciplinary procedures in Westminster. Well, to discuss all of this afternoon is the feminist writer and campaigner, Julie Bindel, and the writer at Spite magazine, Naomi Furst. A very good afternoon to you both, ladies. Julie, if I may kick off with you first of all then. We've heard, haven't we, almost every day for weeks now, more and more lurid allegations relating to Harvey Weinstein. Today, the news about Kevin Spacey, but over the weekend, now we're hearing about Parliament and indeed Holyrood.
No one's surprised about this. People pretend to be surprised, people say they're surprised, people might even feel surprised. But we have known for decades, for centuries, that male violence towards women and girls is a pandemic. We know it's systematic. It's not individual men, it's not just creepy men, it's not just rich and famous men doing this to rich and famous women, which is why we're hearing so much about it. It's not just women in Parliament, it's women in low-paid jobs, it's women in the workplace, it's women in the home. It is everywhere. Now, this is crux time. Women are not victims, women are fighting back, and the reason why so many women are actually coming out and saying me too and saying him too, which is more to the point that there are so many men who are doing this, is because we are resisting. And feminism is built on resisting male violence and male power.
OK, I'll put that point then to Naomi Furst. Would you say that this is an epidemic and that it's a feminist issue?
I would say that this is a hysterical epidemic. Yeah, definitely there's a lot of hysteria going on. There's allegations being thrown around left, right and centre. I mean, not only have we heard about allegations being made against MPs today, we've now had the arts world, the theatre world, even the restaurant world claiming they're all hotbeds of sexual harassment. And it really does feel like it's turning into a panic. And what worries me about that is that when you start panicking, when you start giving into hysteria, it's very hard to get at the truth. Now, we are talking about allegations. We're not talking about facts or things that have been proved to have actually happened. And it does worry me that we seem to be forgetting about, the foundation of our justice system, which is innocent until proven guilty. I do think there is a panic going on, and I'm interested in the truth and not just hysteria.
I wonder, though, if we need to take every single allegation very, very seriously. And this isn't panic. This is just about learning the lessons of everything that we saw with the Savile inquiry, with Operation Newtree, with people coming forward time and again saying they were too afraid to speak up or that they weren't listened to.
The problem is that it's stigmatised, but the stigma is on the girls and the women to whom this happens, and the boys and the men, rather than the perpetrator. Look at Roman Polanski. He raped a 13-year-old, and he's been given awards and standing ovations. This is about the victims knowing that they'll be disbelieved, that they'll be discredited, and that they'll feel shame. Now, what's really interesting about what Naomi said was about facts, and yes, about the basis of our brilliant criminal justice system, where innocent until proven guilty. Well, let's have a look at the rape conviction rate, from attrition through to any convictions that might be got. From reporting, and we know only a fraction of rapes and sexual assaults are reported, we know this from every credible bit of evidence all over the world, we only have a 6% rate of conviction in our country at the moment. So does that mean that 94% of complainants are lying? Or might it mean that rapist after rapist after rapist walks free because the woman is not believed, or she's believed, but they don't want to be horrible to that poor, nice young man standing in the dock because it might ruin his life? Yes, there is what looks like to be some hysteria at the moment, Naomi, but it's not the hysteria coming from the women who are speaking out loud and proud about how they're resisting this. It's coming from the fact that the media will not leave this alone. I've been a feminist activist for 30-odd years, and I'm telling you, often the media don't care about it. I'm glad at the moment this is top news, but the hysteria isn't coming from us. It's actually coming from the fact that for once, and now it really is high time, this issue is getting the coverage and the respect due, because women have been silenced for too long. This does happen.
Let's have a listen then. What is
globe.
actually coming out of Parliament this afternoon? I'm really sorry to interrupt with you, Julie and Naomi. We will be back with you shortly, but we've just heard in the last few moments from John Burker, who you can see pictured there, as saying that the culture of sexual harassment is disturbing, and he has also said in the last few moments that there must be zero tolerance of sexual harassment. Let's have a listen in.
That those arrangements are credible, enforceable, accessible, transparent, and comprise an independent element. That latter notion, that any complaint system and grievance procedure must satisfy constituents as well as colleagues, strikes me as important. The Prime Minister refers in her letter to the prospects for a house-wide corporate scheme. I would be happy to have the idea considered. In the first instance, I hope that parties will live up to their responsibilities, demonstrating both an appetite for change and a practical means of delivering that change without delay. Make no mistake, there is a need for change. The House will also know that members must abide by a code of conduct, which means that alleged breaches can be investigated by the Parliamentary Commissioner for Standards. The Commissioner suggested in her September 2016 consultation on the code a new rule that, and I quote, "A member must treat all those who work in Parliament with dignity, courtesy and respect," unquote. I hope that the Standards Committee, comprising equal numbers of members and lay members, will take forward suggested revisions to the code with appropriate urgency and come to the House for its decision. I hope I have the support of the House in calling for these issues to be resolved swiftly and decisively. It should not require endless debate and discussion. For my part, as Speaker, I am happy to do whatever I can. Others must do likewise. Order. Urgent question, Harriet Harman.
The Leader of the House will make a statement about her plan to tackle sexual harassment in Parliament.
The Leader of the House, Andrea Leadsom.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As you know, I was very keen to come to the Chamber and make a statement today, but I'm delighted to respond instead to the Right Honourable Lady and grateful to you for inviting me to provide a full response. It is absolutely right that the House must address the urgent issue of alleged mistreatment of staff by members of Parliament. These allegations make clear that there is a vital need to provide better support and protection for the thousands of staff members working in Westminster and in constituency offices across the country. And in tackling this problem, we also need to recognise that we have interns, work experience placements, house staff, clerks and civil servants, all of whom deserve to be afforded our care and our respect. Mr. Speaker, I can confirm that the Cabinet Office is urgently investigating reports of specific allegations of misconduct in relation to the Ministerial Code. I'm well aware that the public rightly expect MPs to display the highest standards. And as the Prime Minister outlined in her letter yesterday, there can be no place for harassment, abuse or misconduct in politics. Your age, gender, or job title should have no bearing on the way you are treated in a modern workplace, and nobody is an exception to that. Mr. Speaker, as the Nolan Principles outline, as public servants we must demonstrate accountability, openness and honesty in our behaviour. Regardless of role or position, a new approach will need to cover everyone working for Parliament. If someone is made to feel uncomfortable or believes that others have acted inappropriately towards them, they should be able to contact an external, independent, specially trained support team via phone, the intranet or face-to-face, so that any issue can be raised confidentiality and appropriate advice and support can be given. Everyone in this House must be clear that whenever a serious allegation is made, the individual should go to the police and be supported in doing so. However, it is clear that the current system is inadequate. It is for Parliament to come together to resolve this, but the government believes there should be some guiding principles. First, as in any other workplace, everyone in Parliament should have the right to feel at ease as they go about their work, irrespective of position, age or seniority. Second, whilst we have had a confidential helpline in place for several years, it must now be strengthened as a dedicated support team made more accessible, given more resources, and its role and responsibilities highlighted to all who work here. Third, the support team should have the ability to recommend onward referral of a case to ensure appropriate investigation and action takes place. Fourth, the support team should recommend specialised pastoral support for anyone who is experiencing distress as a consequence of their treatment in the workplace. Fifth, the support team should strongly recommend reporting any allegations which may be criminal directly to the police. Sixth, and in addition, there may be further action which government and political parties themselves can take to ensure high standards of conduct and that inappropriate behaviour is properly dealt with. This is the very least we can do. As the Prime Minister outlined yesterday in her letter to party leaders, we must establish a house-wide mediation service complemented by a code of conduct and contractually binding grievance procedure available for all MPs and peers and their staff, irrespective of their party banner. This will reinforce to those who work here and to the public that we're serious in our treatment of wrongdoing and in our support for those who suffer it. I know all party leaders will work together with the House to reach an agreement and get these changes in place as soon as possible. As members of Parliament, our constituents will be rightly appalled at the thought that some representatives in Parliament may have acted in an entirely inappropriate way towards others. These reports risk bringing all of our offices into disrepute. I know this is an issue of great concern to you, Mr. Speaker, and I know that you will do everything you can to tackle this issue. And I know that members from all parties will want to work alongside you to investigate every claim, provide the right support in the future, and make sure this never happens again. Mr. Speaker, it is a right, not a privilege, to work in a safe and respectful environment. These plans will ensure that Parliament takes a zero-tolerance approach. Parliament must take action in days, not weeks. Thank you.
Harriet Harman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I fully endorse the words that you've said and thank you for the commitment that you've always shown on these issues. And I thank the Leader of the House for her answer. She's right. There is obviously a problem. It's a good thing, actually, that it's been exposed and it has to be dealt with. No woman or man, for that matter, coming to work in this House should be subjected to unwanted sexual advances from those who are in a position of power over them. No one should have to work in the toxic atmosphere of sleazy, sexist or homophobic banter. No MP, let alone a minister, should think it's something to make jokes about. This is not hysteria. This is something which is long overdue for all the parties in this House to deal with. Does she agree that all parties should agree on clear, strict rules about what is not acceptable, make sure everyone knows about it, and that there has to be independence in adjudicating complaints? Does she recognise that it's almost impossible for someone at the bottom of the system to complain and make allegations about someone at the top? And that gives those at the top impunity, which some, few, but some will take advantage of. A young researcher would fear that if she made an allegation about an MP, she would be plastered all over the newspapers and never get another job. A young journalist would know that if she made an allegation about a cabinet minister, she would be subjected to an immediate assault on her integrity, and that would be the only thing that anyone ever remembered her for thereafter. So we must have complainant anonymity at the heart of this. Above all, does she recognise, as we all must, that members of this House have an immensely important job and great responsibility to speak up for our constituents, to hold the government to account? That is what we're here for. No one voted for me to come to this House to engage in high jinks. No one elected any of us to engage in sleazy, oppressive behaviour. So it has to be stopped, and now is the time to do it.
OK, well, we're just hearing from Harriet Harman there, but we've also heard from Andrea Leadsom, the Leader of the House, and indeed the Speaker, John Bercow, this afternoon on plans to tackle the culture of sexual harassment within Parliament, discussions about a contractually binding grievance procedure. I want to reintroduce our guests this afternoon, Julie Bindel, feminist writer and campaigner, and writer at Spike magazine, Naomi Furst, who were listening to that and indeed debating this very issue just before we went to the Commons for that statement. Naomi, if I can pick up with you, just before we heard that, you were responding to the latest sexual allegations and describing them as hysterical. I wonder if you think that this reaction then from Parliament is over the top?
So yeah, I just want to be clear that, of course, sexual harassment and assault allegations need to be taken seriously, and it's actually because I think they should be taken seriously that we have to be very careful about hysteria and panic. And, you know, when you look at the report that the Times saw today with these allegations about MPs, about ministers, some of the information in that was about extramarital affairs, which is not anything to do with sexual harassment. And this is what I'm worried about, is that when people today are talking about sexual harassment, they're conflating off-coloured jokes, bad taste banter, and allegations of rape, which is a serious crime. So I think we have to be very careful about what we mean when we talk about sexual harassment. And because sexual harassment should be taken seriously, if we suggest that all these different things come under that umbrella, then we really denigrate serious crimes, and we're going to make it more difficult for victims of sexual assault or sexual harassment to be taken seriously.
Brenda, would you accept that that's a fair point? Do you think that there are sometimes some grey areas, and it's always very, very difficult to define universally what everybody would describe as an unwanted sexual advance? There are historically many examples of people who marry their bosses at some point, and that relationship had to begin, didn't it?
Of course, and that's clearly something entirely different from unwanted sexual advances, assaults, harassment. And nobody goes to the police because of an off-colour joke. You know, really, I mean, we put up with a huge amount and often very unpleasant comments that we wouldn't even necessarily think to take to bosses or certainly not to police. Men know fine well what sexual harassment is, and women know fine well when it's unwanted and when it's intrusive. Unions across the UK and the world are inundated with calls for help and support from women who are being sexually harassed, from the lowest paid jobs through to the chief exec role. And what we also need to look at is the reality here. The World Health Organization, which gathers data on this issue, in particular sexual and domestic violence of women, have found that the largest cause of morbidity or serious illness and death for women and girls is men's sexual violence and domestic violence.
I mean, I should
so
point
we've
out,
always
we
known that it's a floodgate issue.
About female victims in all of this. But listen, I have to cut
No,
it short. Julie
not.
Bindel, Naomi Furst, really good to get your thoughts, and I'm sorry we couldn't take the full time this afternoon.
The government has called for action within days to deal with allegations of sexual harassment at Westminster. The Leader of the Commons has told the House that she wants to see a new grievance procedure as soon as possible and a fresh code of conduct introduced following claims of misconduct by some MPs. Our political editor Laura Koonsberg report contains some flash photography.
What really happens within Westminster's walls? It's work for thousands of people, but often for young staff making their way. It's a place where they fear they could face harm. With suspicions in the air about politicians' behaviour.
Order.
The Speaker told the parties it's their job to clean up.
There must be zero tolerance of sexual harassment or bullying here at Westminster or elsewhere. Andrea Leadsom.
With a stern-faced Theresa May alongside, the Leader of the Commons promised a new complaint system for staff and vowed the parties will work together.
Our constituents will be rightly appalled at the thought that some representatives in Parliament may have acted in an entirely inappropriate way towards others. Parliament must take action in days, not weeks.
A new support team for staff is planned, but how to tackle the more complicated question of culture.
No woman or man, for that matter, coming to work in this House should be subjected to unwanted sexual advances from those who are in a position of power over them. No one should have to work in the toxic atmosphere of sleazy, sexist or homophobic banter.
Don't think for a moment that much of this is really new. This place is about power, and it's been an open secret for years that too often it's used for the wrong reasons. Suspicions are running high once more, but it's too early to say if this is the start of a turning point or a refrain of the same old story.
Concerns about Westminster's boozy culture, where alcohol, ambition and long hours collide, are long held. In 2014, the Tory MP Nigel Evans was tried and cleared of sexual abuse of young men, but his lawyer described drunken over-familiarity. And the then boss of the Liberal Democrats, Lord Reynard, was accused of behaving inappropriately to female party members. He was never charged, but eventually admitted he may have invaded their personal space. One of those who accused him told us that kind of behaviour was hardly rare.
I also could see this behaviour as sort of seen as kind of quite normal to, bum pinching or inappropriate kissing or any of the kind of social norms that you think on the one side might be okay suddenly goes into the wrong direction.
One of the problems? MPs employ their staff directly. Who can easily complain about the boss to the boss? As a rep for Common Staff summed up.
If there's an issue and you've got nobody to go to, you're just going to slink away with the tail between your legs because you don't want to get a reputation as a troublemaker. And the member gets away with it time and time again because nobody will stand up and say, do you know what, actually, there's a problem there.
But whether victims are willing to spill this place's secrets could change the view of this place. Laura Koonsberg, BBC News, Westminster.
Now, no one should have to work in the toxic atmosphere of sleazy, sexist or homophobic banter, according to the Labour MP Harriet Harman, as the Commons Speaker John Bercow insisted there should be zero tolerance of sexual harassment in Westminster. Meanwhile, dozens of MPs have been named on a spreadsheet compiled by Conservative researchers, accusing them of inappropriate behaviour, a list seen by this programme. One of the researchers has told us why they did it. Many on the list are serving ministers.
3 years ago, after an investigation by this programme, all political parties promised to do more to wipe out sexual harassment in Westminster. Today, fresh allegations reveal just how little appears to have changed.
As the Prime Minister outlined in her letter yesterday, there can be no place for harassment, abuse or misconduct in politics.
No one should have to work in the toxic atmosphere of sleazy, sexist or homophobic banter. No MP, let alone a minister, should think it's something to make jokes about. This is not hysteria. This is something which is long overdue for all the parties in this House to deal with.
In a statement today, the Commons leader vowed to take action within days to set up a complaints procedure for MPs' staff after allegations about serving ministers and opposition politicians. Flanked by Theresa May, she suggested some ministers might be sacked.
And this is what's really set the cat among the pigeons. A list drawn up by Conservative researchers naming MPs accused of harassing staff and colleagues. I've got a copy of the unredacted list. Exactly half of those on it are serving ministers, some of them in the cabinet. Others are former members of the government. And the alleged misdemeanours range from simple tittle-tattle about extramarital affairs to serious allegations of harassment and abuse of power. The vast majority of MPs named are men.
One former minister on the list told us,
outrageous. It's not a serious list, that's for sure. It's absolutely outrageous, completely untrue. If these allegations are made public, it's a very serious matter.
Another said,
as far as I know, it's all I am completely mystified.
One serving minister said,
I'm not a sex pest, I'm a feminist.
The list has been drawn up over a period of years by a handful of Conservative researchers. I spoke anonymously to one of those behind it. He questioned how much would really change when so many ministers are accused of inappropriate behaviour themselves.
What motivation would the Whip's office have to get to the bottom of this? Theresa May's released a statement saying she wants to work with the Speaker on this. How genuine is that? She'd like to get all this to go away, but the Whips won't really help her with that. One of the people on this list has been inappropriate with me. I don't want the government to fall, but it's not right that members of Parliament feel as if they can engage in this sort of inappropriate behaviour because it wouldn't be accepted in other professions.
Yet it's been accepted in Westminster for decades. Our investigation 3 years ago made plain the scale of the problem. A third of men and women we surveyed who worked in Parliament had experienced sexual harassment involving abuse of power.
I saw an MP who said, "Sorry, I didn't recognise you with your clothes on."
He just touched my bum and put his fingers at the top of my pants. I didn't report it, as a lot of people were there to witness it. I just put it down to the Westminster bubble.
Afterwards, both the Conservatives and Labour announced new procedures, and the Commons set up a helpline for MPs' staff. Yet today it's reported that senior Conservatives stopped the former Prime Minister giving staff a right to seek arbitration, something Theresa May is now championing.
What we're talking about here is a relationship between a Member of Parliament and his or her parliamentary staff, who may not be members of the same political party, they may not even vote for the same political party, and it would be entirely improper, in my view, to force a member of staff to go to a party political process when they are employed on an entirely non-political basis as parliamentary staff.
And although the new Liberal Democrat leader Vince Cable said he backed Mrs May, this is the very same man campaigning for his seat this year with Lord Reynard. The Lord Reynard accused of abusing his power as a senior Lib Dem by behaving inappropriately towards women. Lord Reynard denied those allegations, first aired on this programme. Today, one MP after another stood up to denounce the culture of harassment in Westminster, some listing specific allegations against unnamed colleagues. But after all the fine words, will action really now follow?
With me now is Harriet Harman and the Conservative MP Anna Soubry. Anna Soubry, first, you heard there how action was promised across the spectrum, 2014. Now it's promised again. Why has it taken so long?
Oh, you'd have to ask others why it's taken so long. It's because these things are not taken seriously. There is another reason, I think, that's behind this, and there's always this fear that you don't want to rock the boat. You know, don't make too much of a fuss of it, especially at the moment, because we have we don't have a majority, and so we don't want to make a fuss about things because, you know, the Labour Party is chomping at the bit here, they're going to take over and everything else. And keep it all down. It's totally, utterly and completely unacceptable.
So do you think anything's going to change again?
Fed up to the back teeth, and it's got to change.
But will it?
I think after what Andrea Leadsom said, and the fact that I think the PM genuinely takes this very seriously, they've now said that they want the independent body that I certainly have asked for, that is going to we need
to stand up for staff.
No, but we need a system, just like anywhere else in any other organisation. Nothing special because it's Parliament, but if you have a pass or you have an email account through the parliamentary process, you should, as part of getting that pass, getting that account, sign up to the fact that you can make a grievance and be the subject of a grievance. We've got to strip out party politics and strip out the whip's office.
Well, let's strip out party politics now. Harriet Harman, do you back the system that Anna Soubry has described?
I absolutely do, and I recognise what she's saying. She's saying that on her side, and the Tory side, it's like, don't rock the boat, don't you realise we've hardly got a majority and you could bring the government down? And on our side, it's like, well, we all want to stick together because we want to get rid of the Tories and get into government, don't rock the boat. And this has been beset by two things. Firstly, that tribal politics, which encourages people to cover up for misdemeanours on their own side, when we should be setting a higher standard.
And do you accept that Labour's problem with sexism is as entrenched as the Tories' problem with sexism? I mean, for example, Jared O'Mara, accused of saying horrible things about women and also some pretty homophobic things, he was allowed through to be elected as an MP.
But you see, I don't think it's Labour's problem with sexism or the Tories' problems with sexism. I think there's an institutional culture of impunity, and that's for two reasons. Firstly, because the tribalism, which allows people to protect their own when they should be exposing them, but also it's about the difficulty of a junior person complaining about somebody who is powerful. And that's why it's really important, in addition to what Anna said, that there is anonymity for the complainant.
Absolutely.
Because if you're a junior researcher, you think if you complain about an MP, you'll never work again. And if you're a young journalist...
Let me bring in Anna here.
I think you're... No, absolutely agree. I just have to say, I mean, I've never experienced sexism in my own party. And I mean, I was actually a member back as a student. I've never experienced it. That doesn't mean to say by any means it doesn't exist. But I mean, and I don't want this to turn into a debate about momentum and the real problems which I think we've seen in the attacks.
No one mentioned momentum apart from you.
No, exactly, but I don't want to do that. So I really don't want to mention the man that
Anna,
you mentioned and everything else.
But you've just done it.
No, you mentioned his name, and I'm not going to do that.
But
what I'm going to say is we agree. This is the most important thing. This has got to transcend the normal tribal differences, and we've got to have a proper system.
But
like
do
any
the
other
senior blokes
organisation.
in your party agree? The 1922 Committee of Senior MPs blocked David Cameron's attempts to go further. That must dismay you, mustn't it?
I was appalling.
But the point is whether or not anybody who opposes it is going to be able to continue to oppose it. And the trouble is that what happens is that the House of Commons sometimes has to be dragged kicking and screaming to reality. And I sense, I mean, call me over-optimistic, but I sense that on both sides of the House now, there is a real sense that we can actually do something about this.
But
and it's long overdue, because it's been the soundtrack for my political life in
But let's
Parliament.
look at this list we've been
complaining
reporting.
but not feeling they can do anything about it.
This list we've been reporting on, half of the names on the list are ministers. Now, should ministers accused of harassing and found that they have harassed, should they immediately be sacked?
Look, I think the first thing to say is apparently some of the people on this list are guilty of being unfaithful to their partners.
There's an
or their
array of
spouses.
allegations.
And that is, if I may say, that is just morally indefensible.
But some of the allegations are much more serious, of harassment and abuse of power.
To me, it's end of story.
So it's what, sorry?
Yeah, it's just it's just totally unacceptable.
really, immediate sacking. So Mark Garnier?
Everybody is entitled to a fair hearing, and what we do not want is trial by media. No disrespect, we do not want that. We want these things to be done properly. But these are serious allegations. They must be dealt with seriously. And if people have been found to have done things that are wrong, just like
even
in
if
any
that
other
topples the
workplace,
government,
out.
Even if there's a very senior minister.
But we've got to have it on both sides. That's the point. There's got to be a
matter.
clean break whereby, if it happens with Labour, it's the same thing, that basically the standards have got to start from somewhere. I know it's
and you feel there are
easier
senior shadow ministers on your side who have done some pretty despicable things in the past.
When we have anonymity for complainants and people feel there's an independent adjudication, there will be complaints coming forward. And at that point, we really have to be saying, this is where we start afresh. And if heads roll on either side, then that is a price worth paying for actually a decent system.
Harriet Harman, Anna Soubry, thank you very much for joining me.
Well, let's come back here now into a very different cause for concern at the heart of our government claims of sexual harassment in Parliament and what on earth to do about them. The issue has been given added urgency by rumours of a list of MPs accused of inappropriate behaviour. So today, from all sides of the Commons, agreement that it must stop, and from the government, a commitment that complaints should be dealt with in days, not weeks.
Tonight in Westminster, the lights are still on. There's work to do. For days, others have been scrutinising the behaviour here, and now Parliament's taking a good look at itself too.
Colleagues, I wish to make a statement about recent disturbing allegations.
The Speaker the first to admit this afternoon that the place that lays down our harassment laws hasn't been great at policing itself.
Let me make it clear. There must be zero tolerance of sexual harassment or bullying here at Westminster or elsewhere.
Serious enough that the Prime Minister sat in, as MPs agreed complaints should be dealt with by a new independent process, and not them.
I'm well aware that the public rightly expect MPs to display the highest standards. And as the Prime Minister outlined in her letter yesterday, there can be no place for harassment, abuse or misconduct.
The longest-serving female MP agreed that is not what her colleagues are here for.
No one voted for me to come to this House to engage in high jinks. No one elected any of us to engage in sleazy, oppressive behaviour.
So far, the allegations have led to the Trade Minister, Mark Garnier, being investigated for asking his secretary to buy sex toys for him. The former Cabinet Secretary, Stephen Crabb, has apologised for sending explicit texts to a 19-year-old he interviewed for a job, whilst a list circulating in Parliament is reported to name 36 Tory MPs accused of inappropriate behaviour.
I've looked at this at every angle.
There are Labour dossiers too. The MP John Mann is compiling one. He thinks he has evidence about 4, perhaps 5 suspects.
It's not just women, by the way, the men as well, who have come forward. I think that some people should resign. I think some will have to resign because some of this behaviour, frankly, is extraordinarily bad, and in any other workplace they would be sacked.
And the problem stretches beyond Parliament. This councillor says she was assaulted in local government. She's part of a group of victims who are remaining anonymous while they compile a report on harassment in the Labour Party.
What kind of stories are you hearing?
We're receiving stories from all levels of the party. This isn't just something that's taking place in Westminster. It's taking place from the grassroots up, from general members all the way through to instances in Parliament. It's something that's really deep-rooted within the political party.
Tonight, as always, Parliament is concerned with process. But it's not just the reporting of complaints that needs to change, it's the culture that generates them. Paul Brand, News at 10, Westminster.
And our political editor, Robert Peston, is here, as you can see. This is, if you're outside the Westminster bubble, this is going to come across, I think, as a rather bizarre story. There's a list, maybe there's a list, we don't know.
There is definitely a list. There's a list, I've seen the list, I've seen the names on the list, and I'm not going to tell you the names because these are unsubstantiated allegations. Some of them come from a WhatsApp group of female MPs who've been sharing their own experiences. Some are based on rumours that we've all heard over some considerable length of time. Now, one of the reasons I think the Prime Minister looked so fed up today in the House of Commons when Andrea Leadsom, the Leader of the House, was making a statement about what to do about all of this is that the 2 Cabinet Ministers named in this list are particularly close to her. And what she just doesn't know is whether the allegations are true. And secondly, and, you know, this is the sort of thing that me as a journalist, we confront as journalists all the time. Truth isn't just what matters, it's whether the allegations can be substantiated. So the big question for the Prime Minister, the big threat to her, is that all this publicity will persuade youngish women who feel they've been abused, sexually harassed, to now come forward and tell their stories. If they do, this is a scandal that will be much worse for the government than the expensive scandal.
So, in short, you think there is real potential political danger for the government and the Tories in this?
Hang on a second. It's not just the Tories, it's all the parties. But the signs are that there are more Tory MPs who have behaved badly. I mean, let's be under no doubt about this. MPs have abused their positions of power with young people who worked for them for years. The issue is not whether they misbehave. The issue is whether these people, now that they're a bit older, these people who were abused, prepared to stand up and charge these people, effectively in the court of public opinion, with having behaved badly. If they do, this will turn into the mother of all scandals and embarrassments for the Prime Minister. And if she ends up, for example, having to force these people out of their party, and there are by-elections, she hasn't got a majority. This is potentially extraordinarily serious for her.
OK, Robert, thank you very much indeed.
Hard to believe that the Harvey Weinstein scandal erupted only 25 days ago with a piece in the New York Times. It was perhaps inevitable that it would quickly find its way to Westminster. Like Hollywood, Parliament is a male-dominated, status-obsessed environment where socialising and work blend into each other and where ambitious young people offer their labour to the more powerful. It's clear that sexual harassment and assault have been far from rare and shoved under the threadbare carpets of the Palace of Westminster. Well, oddly, one revelation is that Parliament has not really offered employees working within its walls much protection or support. But news of WhatsApp groups and sex pest dossiers have led to a rapid reaction. Westminster does not want this to be a new expenses scandal or a return to sleaze. Here's our political editor, Nick Watt.
Very overly sexual banter in the office, comments about your physical appearance, your breasts, your body shape, all that type of thing, groping, lunging, harassment in terms of people asking you for dates and sort of texting you non-stop, right up to things which probably would cross into more criminal activity as well.
Westminster, the riverside royal palace, which has a reputation for protecting its own, is being prized open. Victims of sexual harassment now feel able to speak out in the wake of the Harvey Weinstein allegations, and Parliament is responding.
Let me make it clear. There must be zero tolerance of sexual harassment or bullying here at Westminster or elsewhere. Whether that involves members or their staff or parliamentary staff or those working on or visiting the estate.
The House must address
The government made clear that MPs will have to change their ways.
I'm well aware that the public rightly expect MPs to display the highest standards. And as the Prime Minister outlined in her letter yesterday, there can be no place for harassment, abuse or misconduct in politics. Your age, gender or job title should have no bearing on the way you are treated in a modern workplace, and nobody is an exception to that.
Today did feel like a significant moment as Parliament finally caught up with the 21st century. MPs have traditionally guarded their right to police Westminster. The first challenge to that came with the expenses scandal, and now there is cross-party consensus on the need for an external process to support victims of sexual harassment. But some voices are wondering whether today really will be a seminal moment if MPs accused of inappropriate behaviour are able to remain in the shadows. One Tory veteran does believe change is on the way, ending the role of whips policing complaints about inappropriate behaviour.
One of the major roles of whips is intelligence gathering, to try and avoid problems in the first place. Not necessarily blackmail MPs, but simply to avoid problems arising if you know what their views are on a number of subjects. That's good whipping. But whether the role of the whips is to act as some sort of quasi-policeman, particularly if a crime has not been actually committed, that's another question.
Every whip's office will have a big black file on MPs, and that will include bad behaviour, including sexual harassment. And sometimes there has been a feeling that the whip's office know that there are sort of people doing bad behaviour, whether it's drinking too much or sort of, being inappropriate. But they're not actually going to do anything in terms of disciplining those people, but they'll use that information to help them when it comes to leveraging them to vote in a certain way or other things.
But Michael Fabricant fears a witch hunt.
It's not fair, actually, to base things on rumour. There has to be evidence. And there mustn't be witch hunts either. I feel there's a growing witch hunt mentality currently going on, We've got to ensure that inappropriate behaviour is stamped out. It's wrong, it's unprofessional. But at the same time, we don't want to see individuals who have been blameless being accused of things which maybe they hadn't really done, or maybe at the time everyone was sloshed. I don't know. You sometimes get that, and we've got to be very careful that we don't get into that situation.
Aisha Hazarika believes this is a deeply serious moment.
I've known it from my own experiences. I started at the age of 21 in Westminster. I was lunged at myself, and this happened a number of times through my career. This is not a problem which is just restricted to one political party. It is happening in every single political party right now. And I think what people in positions of power, MPs, need to know is that actually a lot of women and younger men as well have had enough of it, and they are talking to each other. And I think these lists are being compiled across every single party right now.
Westminster is a notoriously secretive culture. Pressure from the outside world may at last force change, assuming no return to the old, closed ways.
Nick there. Well, here in the studio we have Bernard Jenkins, chairman of the Constitutional Affairs Select Committee, Stella Creasy, Labour MP for Walthamstow, and the Daily Telegraph's Laura Hughes, who's been writing about this for quite a while. But we have some late news on this, and Nick Watt is with us. So, Nick, you were holding the front page of The Sun there.
Yes, so The Sun is reporting that Michael Fallon, who is the Defence Secretary, has admitted that he inappropriately touched a female journalist, that is Julia Hartley-Brewer, the radio presenter. It is important to say that this happened 15 years ago, and they both consider the matter closed. A spokesman for Michael Fallon said he'd apologised when the incident happened 15 years ago, and that both he and Julia now consider it closed. And a friend of Michael Fallon is saying that they're good friends. He overstepped the mark when he put his hand on her knee. She made clear it was unwelcome, and he apologised immediately 15 years ago. And obviously this came about because Julia Hartley-Brewer did a tweet, quite a lengthy statement today, in which she mentioned this incident, didn't mention who the minister was.
Yeah, she said she wasn't mentioning the name because she didn't think it was serious enough.
She thought it's a closed matter, and she said, I actually regarded it as mildly amusing.
Before we get into the thanks, Nick. Before we get into the generalities, let me just ask about a reaction to that particular story. Bernard, you've heard some of the context there. What do you think as you read that?
My immediate
front page?
reaction is, having read Julia's comment, where she makes a distinction between what might be proper harassment. She does not consider that this was harassment. She regards it as an inappropriately flirtatious moment, and that's the end of it. And let's be clear, the more serious issues that are being discussed are where people have wanted to complain, have felt unable to complain, or have complained, and legitimate complaints have not been dealt with. That is not in that category. And I think that also tells us that we're in a bit of a media storm now, where sort of anything is going to generate a headline, however trivial, and I don't suggest that that is completely trivial, but it's obviously much less important than this other stuff.
And Stella Creasy, do you agree with that interpretation on what you know about this specific case?
I think this is the challenge with all of this, though, Evan. I am not the person who should be making a judgment on this. What we need are processes where professionals deal with allegations and complaints, and the people involved have the right themselves to say what's happened. But it's not like this is one of the problems, is this kind of speculation.
Right, but Julia wasn't going to complain to anybody about that, and she's made it clear she would never have complained to anybody about that. So I agree, we need professional.
Yeah, I
professional system.
I don't think
that
this
we
is particularly helpful, frankly. We know that there are a series of complaints. We know there's a series of concerns, and we should talk about how we're going to address that rather than individual cases.
Which is why we got you in. But first, let me then come to Laura, because you've been working on this quite a time, Laura, before Harvey Weinstein brought it all into the public attention. How big a problem is it in Westminster? And is it a bigger problem in Westminster than it is everywhere else in society?
Well, look, I think you need to look at Parliament as 650 small businesses without an HR department. If you had 650 small businesses in the real world, of course, you would have a handful of bad employers who acted inappropriately. I'd like to make it really clear, I've been looking into MPs for a very long time and talking to lots of staff. It's a handful, a large handful.
Is that what you're saying, a handful?
I don't think it's
10%,
systemic. I think
15%?
I've been working with some really good MPs who have been determined to help expose this. And what I've been looking into, as Bernard was just talking about, is serious cases. I've spoken to women who went to the parliamentary authorities and said to them, I have been sexually assaulted by one of your MPs. What are you going to do about it? And they were told, there is nothing we can do about it.
So that's where you, in a way, where the scandal is, because you're...
Yes, the scandal is that there is nothing to protect young people. I'm 25 myself, so the reason I started looking into this is because I got to know lots of researchers and staff. And it's not just a sexual harassment issue, it's also bullying. It's also unreasonable expectations put on very young people who have
bullying
no
of men
HR.
And women, bullying men and women.
Absolutely, this is not just Tory men and young females, this is every gender, every party, and it's going at all different angles here. And we need to really be looking at actually the cases where serious sexual assault allegations have been made and they have been ignored. To me, that is absolutely extraordinary in 2017.
Let's turn to our MPs. Bernard, how on earth has Parliament allowed this to persist? I mean, you don't need Harvey Weinstein to tell you that the Harvey Weinstein case to come along to tell you this is rubbish. Can't be.
Well, I think it is particularly difficult to regulate Parliament because, as individuals and as an institution, we are sovereign. We have to have particular immunities and privileges and independence in order to fulfil our constitutional function. And also,
you don't have to grope people to fulfil.
No, I'm not excusing that.
You don't need forgiveness for, of course you.
I'm not excusing that. I'm just saying why it is difficult to regulate Parliament. But also, Parliament tends to be behind what is happening in other corporations and in other public institutions. Other public institutions, dare I say, the BBC, have had their difficulties with this sort of thing, and are catching up. We've got our bit of catching up to do too.
Stella, you must feel annoyed. Nothing's been done. Why has it not been done? Why didn't you raise this? I mean,
whoa.
No, but I mean,
that's. You don't know that we haven't raised things. I think it doesn't take a rocket scientist to work out that when you're dealing with people who are in positions of power, taking powerful decisions, questions about imbalances of power and what that leads people to do, it's all about professionalism, ultimately. Laura is right. You've got 650 sort of small businesses without a HR function, a lot of people who maybe haven't had experience of managing people and what is appropriate, what is inappropriate. I would also say it's not just about Parliament. It is about our political culture. Look, frankly, a lot of the people who work in politics are maybe people who want to go on to positions, whether they're journalists, whether they're researchers, whether they're working in think tanks, whatever. The idea of speaking out on somebody, I thought Harriet put it brilliantly today. She said any woman or indeed young man who did that will know for the rest of their career that is something that is associated with them.
They're remembered for it.
Can I make one point quickly? Is I think what's really important and what lots of young people and actually just any age say to me who work for an MP is that when we're looking at putting in a new HR structure, it has to be independent of the parties.
Well, that's the point.
If you're young, you're not going to complain.
But Bernard has made the point. Parliament is sovereign, so Parliament always has to be able to...
But also, look, one of the really important things is absolutely where you've got criminal matters, they need to be investigated. But we're also talking about a culture which is essentially what you'd call constructive dismissal, because it is intolerable for anybody to work in an environment where you are being bullied, harassed, where it's misogynistic behaviour, homophobic behaviour.
But I can be sacked if I do that here.
Absolutely.
I can be sacked.
Yeah,
but the only
people
who can sack you are the people who appointed you, who are the voters. So can you sack an MP, Bernard, because they behave really bad?
That you go beyond the pale, and there are sanctions against MPs which effectively would amount to sacking, and we've talked about possibly having recall.
Yes, come on. It's time for recall.
But recall would be an idea.
But the point is, we have this thing called a code of conduct. We wouldn't be having this conversation if this code of conduct worked. And when you say, when you say, have we called this out before? The committee I chair actually submitted evidence to the review of this code, saying we need to have a complete rethink because there's tons in here about lobbying and financial interests and conflicts of interest and all that. There's a little bit at the beginning about the principles of public life, but virtually nothing about how we should discuss that, how we should develop people's professional competencies as employers, what kind of leaders we should be seeking to develop.
No, I know, but we all know, and we don't need to read a code of conduct to know that groping is not acceptable of a junior.
But also, look, one of the worries I had today was Andrea Leadsom talked a lot about things that might be available for victims. There was nothing about what might happen to the perpetrators.
Right. So can
I voted
just
for
ask,
recall before. I'd vote for it again in this circumstance.
Would you support recall, some provision in which the voters are told what has happened and given a chance to re-vote on that?
That's one piece of the armoury we might deploy in order to deal with this.
But it sounds like the Constitution...
but the point is...
It's the voters who appoint you.
But there's a point is there's a huge amount of confusion about values, principles, rules, sanctions. It needs a complete rethink.
Is there confusion still?
As there has been a complete rethink in many other walks of life, but not in Parliament.
Is there confusion?
I think if you're confused about whether it's appropriate to put your hand on the knee of somebody,
I
there's
think
a problem.
the rules.
I think there is an issue as well with constructive dismissal and how we make sure it's a professional working environment. There need to be sanctions as well, and what we didn't hear today was sanctions.
So the rules are confusing.
Exactly.
Because actually, if you look at that code of conduct and you look at the respect policy, it covers the relationships between house staff, so someone that might work in the kitchens or guard the doors.
Yeah.
But not the researchers.
It doesn't deal with the relationship between an MP and their staffer. And actually, it says that, a complaint that you might make about an MP would be considered a part of that MP's personal life.
Right. Yeah, well, that's hopeless.
Bernard, one interesting thing that comes out of this is that the whips have been the kind of the go-to people. You're assaulted by your boss. You go to the whips, who are the most cynical people.
But this was one of the reasons why there was pushback in our party against a so-called independent mediation service, because actually it was proposed that the whips and party volunteers should be the mediators, including, incidentally, somebody from Conservative Future, and look what they turned out to be like. So if we're going to have an independent mediation service and a system of calling, the whips cannot do it. No,
okay, so Stella, you agree with that?
We need independent reporting, we need third-party reporting. I want it done by professionals who have experience of dealing with people who've experienced sexual harassment or misogyny. Yeah.
A degree of agreement. OK, we'll end on that note. Thank you all.
Great.
Move on to, do we not? OK. So, Telegraph, which we saw just there, sex scandal could be worse than expenses.
They've quoted an MP called Tim Lawton who said that, famous to most people for spending an hour of the day every morning in the bath.
Mindfulness.
Alone.
Didn't he support Andrea Leadsom?
He did.
He did remember the March on Parliament.
I think they were
organised.
I think they were very friendly in their university days.
Were they?
Yes.
Oh, very sweet.
He says this could be as bad as the expenses scandal. But you have to remember the expenses scandal. 3 MPs went to prison. 5 members of the House of Lords went to prison, I think. I'm not sure that anybody's suggesting that anybody in Westminster who's been linked to this dossier is going to go to prison.
So, let's take a look at The Sun, shall we, which talks about...
Well, he's certainly not going to go to prison, is he? Okay. Michael Fallon, for touching Julia Hartley-Brewer's knee. He's a brave man, because Julia Hartley-Brewer packs quite a punch.
Yes,
and she's a toughie, and she did say to him at this dinner, if you do it again, I'm going to knock your lights out. End of.
Yeah.
And she says... She would have. And she would have. And she says they're still mates, she's not upset about it. I don't suppose she'll agree it's a shock confession.
He's Defence Secretary. If she was in the Armed Forces, she'd be in the Marines, quite simply. Now, this does not sound like a big case. If it's in the dossier and other cases are like this, they're not going to rock Westminster.
No.
Now, if it hadn't have been Julia Hartley-Brewer who had her knee felt and the person had objected, then it would be a case of harassment.
Because it's
unquestionably. And it shouldn't... I think she makes clear in a statement there are some serious allegations, and she doesn't want them demeaned...
By this.
By blowing this up.
Because part of the problem here is, what is the definition of harassment? It's going to be different for different people.
Well,
it's going to be a subjective judgment.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, I mean, there's Julia Hartley-Brewer's response to this incident, she says, happened in 2002.
15 years ago.
No one was remotely upset or distressed by it. My knee remains intact. I refer you to my earlier statement, which says exactly that point you're making. I believe it is absurd and wrong to treat workplace banter and flirting, and even misjudged sexual overtures between consenting adults as being morally equivalent to serious sexual harassment or assault. It demeans genuine victims of real offences. Anyone with any allegations against an MP or anyone else should speak up now and provide the evidence to ensure any necessary action is taken. And this is the problem, isn't it? This congregation.
But listen, look how old this is, and look how old this is too. 15 years ago.
Yeah, but this is anyone who knows what's in that dossier, and we do. There are other cases like this which are not serious. Other allegations are more serious. If you look at the Brexit minister, Mark Garnier's secretary, she clearly feels still upset what happened when she was asked to go and buy two sex toys while he stood outside, and was given a name that she didn't like to be given. So it is harassment. It's an abuse of power. And somebody feels.
It's in the beholder, is it?
It is absolutely. There might have been somebody else if Michael Fallon had been touching their knee in that suggestive manner. Would have taken a different approach, and then you have to side with that person. If that person finds it inappropriate, then it is inappropriate.
A spokesman for Michael Fallon said that he had apologised when the incident happened 15 years ago, and both Julia and he now consider the matter closed.
Well, I think they're quite
and a close ally of Michael Fallon said Julia's a good friend of Michael's. Yeah. He overstepped the mark when he put his hand on her knee. She made clear it was unwelcome, and he rightly apologised 15 years ago.
Well,
that's why I don't think this has got the potential to be as serious as the expenses scandal. Because I think there are other examples like that.
But in the wider, it's an insight into a culture where some people have clearly been harassed and have felt their careers are going to be marred if they complain, and it's wrong. And Westminster should be better than it is.
OK, we'll see what other headlines are dragged up on that story in the coming days. There's the Times. The minister's face being fired in sex pests crackdown. Sex pests.
There's a couple of women in there too, you know, in the dossier.
There are, but look, if they were serious, Mark Garnier would be out. They wouldn't give him the Prime Minister's 100% confidence vote this morning.